The Right Side with Doug Billings.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my show, The Right Side. Doug Billings here with you. Ladies and gentlemen, the state of Kansas. Wow. Procedure, power, the grassroots versus leadership in the elected class in the Sunflower State. Today, I'm not talking about Washington, D.C. I'm talking about Kansas. Because Kansas just gave the country a clean, clear case study in how power actually works inside of a political party, and how the grassroots can be sidelined without a single vote ever being taken. What Kansas leadership refused to do, the case I'm going to make with you today. Here's what happened. House Speaker Dan Hawkins and Senate President Ty Masterson declined to move forward with a redistricting vote, saying that they don't have the votes. We don't just have no's, we got big no's, said Hawkins. So on the surface, that sounds practical to a lot of people. Why bring something to the floor if it's going to fail, right? After all, come on, we don't want to look like fools. But that question reveals something deeper about how a republic and a state either represents people or manages them. A vote is not just about winning, ladies and gentlemen. A vote is about revealing. When something goes to the floor, a bill, a procedure, whatever, it creates a public record. It tells every Kansan who stood where, who voted for what, who represents which priorities. And when leadership blocks a vote, they don't just block a bill, they block visibility. And in a republic, visibility is the oxygen of accountability. So how the agenda control and how the elected elite use agenda control becomes power. Most people think that elections are where the power lives. And yes, elections matter, obviously, but between elections, power lives in committee chairs, floor schedules, procedural rules, whatever gets a hearing, and whatever sees daylight, right? If leadership doesn't schedule something, the public never gets to see the debate. And if the public never gets to see the debate, they can't judge their representatives. If you control the calendar, you control the conversation. That's not ideology, that's mechanics. And it's so why we don't have the votes is a strategy. It's not necessarily a fact. Let's translate that phrase into plain English. Sometimes it means, well, we don't have what it takes this time. We don't want this to fail publicly, Doug, because a failed vote still does something powerful. It tells voters exactly who blocked it. And once voters know that, the next election becomes a reckoning, not just a contest. Blocking the vote protects everyone in the leadership circle from being on the record. Silence is safer than sunlight in politics. And Kansas isn't alone, but Kansas is honest about it, right? Boy, Hawkins told us, we're just not going to put it up for a vote. Ty Masterson, running for governor, sits right there along a feckless leader doing exactly the same thing that we would expect rhinos to do. And the model exists everywhere, folks. Congress does it, state houses do it, city councils do it, school boards do it. But Kansas gave us a clean example of how it works inside of a party that campaigns as conservative, as populist, and as a grassroots-driven organization, but then governs through process management. It's really an issue of leadership versus the grassroots. There are really two Republican parties in the state of Kansas, in most states, to be fair. We have the grassroots party, the people who knock on doors, show up to county meetings, donate small amounts of money, and care deeply about maps and borders and schools and taxes. And then we have the leadership class, the elites, who have been there for a while and they're making a career out of it. The people who manage committees, cultivate donors, control the calendars, and negotiate behind closed doors. Yeah, they often wear the same letter next to their name, don't they? The big, bright, beautiful red R. But they don't always want the same outcomes as we do. The grassroots wants results, and the leadership class wants stability, because stability means fewer controversies, fewer recorded fights, fewer angry donors, fewer primaries. But us, from the grassroots, results mean to us risk, exposure, pressure, and accountability. And accountability, ladies and gentlemen, is uncomfortable to the elected class. Now, we had a redistricting tool detail, and we need to know why that matters. Kansas reportedly spent public money on a redistricting tool before the special session was rejected. Now, think about what that signals. Preparation happened. Resources were used. Plans were made. And then the public moment. The vote never came. That's not just inefficiency. That's insulation. Insulating them from us. And it allows leadership to say, well, we tried, without ever letting the people see who stood in the way. Now, why this hits home for Kansans? Because it's not abstract. District lines shape who represents you, how competitive elections are, and whether the new voices can emerge. Voices like mine, and yeah, voices like Stacey Rogers, voices that are not part of the elected class, that are not, where I am not part of the wealthy class. But that's what the GOP wants, and that's what we're getting in the debates as an example. And it also decides whether incumbents are protected or not, this system that we're in. So when redistricting gets buried in the process, what's really being buried is the future of representation itself. I'm telling you, maps don't just draw districts, they draw political opportunity. The governor question in Kansas, style becomes culture. When a legislative leader positions for a higher office like Ty Masterson is trying for governor, voters should ask a simple question. How does that person handle public accountability? Does Ty welcome recorded votes every time? Or does he manage outcomes quietly behind the scenes in closed doors? Because a governor doesn't just run an office, ladies and gentlemen. A governor sets the tone for transparency across an entire state. Leadership style at the top becomes culture everywhere else. We've got to be able to understand that. And the bigger picture, decisions without consent are a big deal. Layer that in with what we've seen on major economic decisions in Kansas. Big packages, big dollars, small circles of decision makers, very small. If you're not in the club, you can't be part of the decision-making process. Screw the public. And often the people, us, who pay for it, find out after the press conference has already been scheduled, right? And that's not just Kansas problem. I understand that. That is a modern governance problem in America. When decisions get bigger and the circle gets smaller, trust gets weaker. And what rhino means structurally, I know we throw that word around a lot, don't we? Rhino, rhino, rhino. What it means structurally is the people use it as an insult, but it's more than that. At its core, the term rhino describes something structural. It describes a politician who campaigns with the base all day long, but governs with leadership, the elected class, and avoids being on the record when it matters the most. Systems, ladies and gentlemen, that we have to understand, systems shape behavior more than slogans do. You can send a fighter into a system designed to reward managers, And if the system never changes, it will eventually either change the fighter or remove the fighter from the whole system. And the civic lesson that we see here today, the power of memory. A republic doesn't just survive on elections, my friends. It survives on memory, on citizens remembering who forced votes, who avoided votes, who showed up in the open, and who stayed in the back rooms making deals with governors and millionaire, billionaire sports tycoons. Accountability begins when citizens become the archive, if you know what I mean. So a final thought. Kansas is a mirror. Right now, it's a mirror for the country. It's showing us the difference between representation and management, transparency and insulation, and grassroots energy and leadership control. The hierarchy of the elected class. And the question every voter eventually has to answer is simple. Do you want leaders who manage outcomes, or do you want leaders who take stands? Because you can't have both for very long. I'm running to be governor, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm going to speak to you when I win exactly like this. And I will call the elected class and the hierarchy out, even if, and especially if it's our party members doing it. And I want you to know, as you look into these, as you look forward to the debate that's coming up, the Kansas GOP wanted to be paid $10,000 from every candidate to get on that stage, and you got to have $500,000 in the bank. I understand, it's like running a business and so forth. But this is how they keep the commoner out. And the grassroots never will have a chance with that kind of system. So I hope that you all become brave enough to speak up about this. We are in this thing together, ladies and gentlemen. This is not about one map. It's not about one vote, but about what kind of political culture we want in Kansas and in this country. And above all else, ladies and gentlemen, we are in this thing together. Please believe that. For the Republic. God bless you. Cheers.
The Right Side with Doug Billings.